You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could. Yeah, and times are changing everywhere. Do we dream and do we dare? It's up to you, the door is open wide. Feel the rhythm of today, learn a part and join the play. The world is here, let's take it for a ride. You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could. Larger, larger than, bigger, bigger than, living hopes and dreams. Every boy and girl, higher, higher than, brighter, brighter than, all you wanted. You know, you could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You can have all you ever wanted. You know you could.
Good morning. Welcome back to the channel, Ecuador and Colombia, and welcome to another Coffee Time Live. I don't know how long my throat's going to hold up. I mean, I'm not sick. I got all kinds of suggestions. The other day, I got home and I was going to be going out at 6. I had 3 hours. Not enough time to really start much of anything. I sat down in the chair. I fell asleep. I'd only had a couple hours sleep the night before. But the fan was on me. I mean, it was pointing at me. And I fell asleep. I woke up a few hours later, 2 minutes before 6. So I had 2 minutes to get to my appointment. And my voice was not normal. So yesterday I had no voice. But I've been pounding these red fruit tea with honey. So we'll see how I go. The weather outside is not frightful. It is gorgeous. You know, the thing about this camera, you look at that and you see the little mounds and it's nice and bright green, little buildings further back, and then you see the mountains, but they look very unimposing. They look small. And it's the camera, because in reality, you look out there and it's like mountain, and then there's taller ones behind it. But this camera is one of those, it's got somewhat of a fisheye lens. It's designed for close-up. And it just doesn't do it justice. But it's still gorgeous. All right. Happy Father's Day. Okay. It was cute. What do we got here? Got Yuka, greetings from Finland. And of course, thank you for your contribution. As always, it's appreciated. Sam and Peg, good morning from Armenia. Oh, you made it. How you doing? Seven, good morning. visiting daughter in Medellin. Rob's in Medellin this weekend with some friends of his. Ron, audio and video good. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. What do we got here? What is this thing? There. Did the rest of your art fall down? No, I've got to rearrange. I got to rearrange everything. And I just, instead of throwing it up quick like I did last time, because I wanted you to see the neon sign. There's things that I need to do, and I was really busy this week. So sometime probably later next week, hopefully for next coffee time, I'll have it set up. Good morning from Dallas. Thinking about going to Rio Negro in Antioquia next Thursday. Every time I click on this thing, it's kicking up this message that's blocking my chat. Let's see. Morning, Lauren, Juka, Cash. Whoop. William, good morning. How you doing, William? I was thinking about you yesterday. Sam and Peg, perhaps coffee or something later. Not today, not tomorrow. I should have some free time Tuesday. Thursday, I'm probably going to Price Mart, Pareda. Yeah, but I think Tuesday I've got some free time. And Steve is in town too. He's, let's see, no, it's this next Friday. And then he's going to Manizales. So I'd like to meet up with him also. All right. Let's see. Well, I mentioned Rob was in Medellin, and you know that when he travels different places, he'll send in little video clips that are usually very pertinent, important information because he's the man on the scene. Well, he sent me one this morning, and I'm going to share it.
This has got to be the nicest urinal view that could ever exist. Look at that.
Nothing like a urinal shot. I'm looking at that. I'm thinking that must be Guatapé. We're in Armenia until Monday the 26th. Okay. Sorry, this error thing. It's not an error. It's a menu. Every time I click on this to show it on the screen, I'm getting this menu, and it has nothing to do with putting it on the screen. I don't know what the heck is going on. Didn't do that before. All right, it's always something, right? Now, last week, towards the end, when we're into the Q&A, we got hit with endless spam. It was frustrating because it was eating up the screen, and it was a real problem. I did some research on it, and apparently this is happening all over the place with a lot of people. YouTube is aware about it. And when you go to their bulletin boards where this is mentioned, they'll have like a referral link that doesn't really say much of anything. Like, we've addressed this by giving you user controls, but they haven't addressed it. And they turned the comments off because people were massively complaining about it. But you go outside of YouTube to other bulletin boards, and people are all kinds of mad because this is like live shows that's happening a lot. There's ways to address it. And I've turned on the 30-minute or 30-second slow mode. It was mentioned last week, but in the software I'm in, I couldn't address it without actually shutting off and turning back on. So I've got it on. Maybe that'll take care of it. But these things are, somebody's implementing it, but they're actually bots. That's why they go so fast. That's why you can't keep up with them like we were trying last week. Both Rob and I were trying to get rid of them, but they were just coming too fast. And they had 7 or 8 different accounts. So we'd shut off one, another one would kick in. It's very frustrating. Oh, gravel. Hope it holds up. So I got a big topic I want to talk about. So the next step would be to have only subscribers in chat. Well, I know a lot of people don't want to have subscriptions to a lot of play. As a matter of fact, I think something like 70% of my regular viewers aren't subscribed. And I don't want to try to force you to subscribe, but that would be the next step. And then the last step, because YouTube could actually stop this, but they don't. They say, well, you can make it subscriber only. The last one is you can make it permission to the channel only. I don't know exactly how that, I mean, I know how to click it on, but if it's live, I don't see where I can actually accept you and put you in then. It appears that I would actually have to go to the YouTube software and manually enter in each person into a screen. So the only way that would be doable is to tell everybody to send me your YouTube channel name and I can enter it in. And it would be very cumbersome, time consuming. Half the people, they would forget about it. So I don't know. We'll see how this goes. Nadik Mark, good morning. Agua Chica. Well, welcome to the world of AI. Yeah. Texas Tater, good morning from Texas. William, morning. Sorry I didn't see you earlier. Okay. All right. I have to figure out how to get rid of that thing. All right. What else we got here? I got a few things I want to get through before I get to my topic. Oh, last week I gave you some information about they found those kids in the Amazon jungle. There's 4 of them. Look like walking skeletons. But the police dog, has been lost. Well, I just want to quickly show you, it's blown up on social media in Colombia. And I'll just show you a few of the memes that are popping up all over. There's a whole bunch of them. There's a lot of little videos, but these are just memes that I think I just grabbed 5 or 6 of them. But I want to show you, take a look. You got this one, Saving Private Ryan, but it's Saving Private Wilson. Cute. Okay, so we got that. And 2 other things. The dog was found, not as of yesterday. I looked last night, and he was still missing. Since it's Father's Day, I saw a picture in Pareda talking about Father's Day barbecue. So what do they get? Well, this is what you get. And some people go, ew. But remember, this is Colombia. And in Colombia, people are more polite than that. And what Colombians would say is just be grateful you have something to put on the table. Okay. Now, in Colombia, after this, we get to my topic. In Colombia, you have different regions, and different regions have different names for the females, for other things too, but right now we're talking about the females. So on the coast, costeñas, most people that watch this are familiar with the term paisa. and it's not just Bandeja Paisa, but the name for the girls. It runs from basically Medellin through Armenia. More so this area, it's a wider area, but that's neither here nor there. I just say that because I was saying, no, Paisas are Medellin. No, yes, but not only. So you have Paisas. You've got Bogota girls, Rolos. But I saw a clip that was kind of cute with a Colombian explaining the difference between two. So check this out. And this is actually very true.
Paisa, la cosa sería así. Hola, mi amor, ¿cómo estás? Sí, mi vida, ya yo llevo como 3 horas esperándote, ¿te demoras? Ah, no, una horita más, no, tranquilo, yo te espero para irnos juntos, mi vida. Bueno, mi amor, te amo, ya nos vemos. Ay, pero como tu novia es costeña. Ajá, David, ¿vas a llegar o no vas a llegar? No, hombre, David, son las 6 de la tarde. ¿Tú por qué me dices que me vas a recoger a las 4 y son las 6 y no has llegado? No, hombre, manda huevo, yo estuviera haciendo aseo, estuviera dormida, estuviera echándome una canita al aire, pero tú me tienes aquí esperando, sentado en una mecedora, dando limpia, dando honda, de un lado para el otro, de un lado para el otro, y no llega.
There's so much truth in that. Stereotypes can be funny, they can be dangerous. And today we're going to talk a little bit about stereotypes. One of my pet peeves is people that come to visit any other country. Well, I'll give you, most of you know my background. I'm going to do this real quick. You know, I've traveled to over 20 countries. I've lived in 3 countries 3 years or longer. I've lived in Japan. I've lived in Ecuador. First time and this time I've lived 6 years in Colombia. You know, I've traveled around a lot. I was in the military. I was in a war. I've seen poverty. You know, I've had a full life and I've seen a lot of things. And it's annoying when you have less experienced travelers go to a country and they make assumptions. And you'll see it all over Facebook. And then when they see it in Facebook, it gets repeated, and then it becomes truth in some people's minds. And it's just kind of crazy. And so people of the country, and it happens all over the world, but people of the country can get pretty resentful that you're getting, you know, boxed into some stereotype that may be true for a few, but doesn't mean it's true for everybody. And it can be frustrating if you're on the other end of that. I'll give you some quick examples of some stereotypes. That people come to Colombia. They assume that the minimum salary is the average. I hear that all the time. Well, the poor people of Colombia, they only make like $300 a month, and everybody's, you know, in that situation. That's crap. Assume that there are no work benefits. Well, there is. There's pension benefits, there's health benefits, there's transportation benefits, all part of the wage. Assume everyone is poor. A lot of people are poor. As a matter of fact, the last 2 years, it's really spiking up, and it will just increase. Right now, it's hard to know for sure because it's not like it's reported every day. But there's probably over 30% of the country that's living in poverty right now. And I know that's a lot more than we talked about just some months ago, but it's a growing problem. And you also have that pretty much all over the world. Assuming that everyone wants your money. Well, if all you know is a place like Medellin, where that carries more truth, then maybe you believe that of everybody. But in most of Colombia, that's not the case at all. It's not like that. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to give somebody something, keep the change or whatever, and they just refuse it. Assume that you can buy everything. People get here, and because of the kinds of things that all these poor people, it's so condescending. And it's like, they'll be grateful if I give them this little thing here. And because they're poor and they're desperate, they'll do anything for money, and I'll take advantage of that. There's all kinds of stuff like that. It's really despicable. There's an assumption that everybody understands you. Like, they actually understand me, but they're pretending they don't. And I don't know why people would think that, but even if somebody's had, they had a semester in high school of English, did you ever have a semester? I had a semester of French, knew a little more French because my mother was born in France. I also had a semester of Latin. That helped me because I was a science major in the university, but I couldn't speak Latin, and there was only a short time in my life I could speak French, and it was barely passable. I mean, a semester doesn't do it. So if you're in high school and you've got a mandatory semester of English, how many people in that class even want to have that class? What's the point? So, it's just a bad assumption. So what brings this up? Well, this week I met with another person from Bogota. And whenever I run into people from Bogota, I get a stereotype pointed at me, and it seems to be like a theme among people in Bogota and Medellin, I should say, those two places in particular. And I understand where it comes from. They're in an environment where they're seeing some of that. But, what's stereotype? Well, they assume that I can't understand real Colombia, that I can't understand its problems because I can't relate to it. I've never seen or experienced poverty, for example. And those who watch my channel regularly know that I grew up in abject poverty without running toilets, without food. I had to hunt for food. That went on for 2 years. I never got new clothes. I had hand-me-downs from the equivalent of the Salvation Army or neighbors that would, throw pity on me. I wore shoes, 3 sizes too big. So, I lived in upstate New York and we didn't have heat, so I get what poverty is firsthand, but I also get what poverty is based on my travels. For example, people in Colombia think the poorest people in the world are in Colombia. Well, there are some people that fit that. But my first visit to the Philippines was in the early 70s. And in that decade, I'd been to Vietnam, I'd been to Thailand, a number of other places where they were poor. I'd certainly been to Mexico a number of times. And back then, there's more poverty everywhere. But I'd never seen before or since the extent of the poverty that existed in some areas of the Philippines in the 70s. And when I was there were 2 things that occurred really kind of shook me. One, I was just walking down the street, kind of taking it all in. There was a lot to take in. I'd never experienced the extent of what I was seeing. And this girl came up. I don't know her age, but she looked really young. And at the time, I was only 20 something. But I'm guessing maybe she was 15, 16, 17. And she wanted to sell herself to me for a bag of rice. And it wasn't registering. And I go, what do you mean? And basically she wanted me to go have sex with her if I would buy her, like a 20-pound bag of rice. And I had no interest in that, but I was curious. I've always been curious. So I want to know why rice? Why? So she took me to where she lives. And where she lived was this homemade tin thing that was probably 4 feet by 3 feet. And inside was her mother. and her mother was holding a relatively newborn baby, and they had no food. And so the daughter was out trying to find somebody who would provide them with a bag of rice that would last for a period of time. I mean, it's a shocking situation. And everywhere you have stories to some extent similar, you know, somebody's going to sell themselves for, but I'd never seen something like for a bag of rice. You know, the desperation I saw at that level. But that wasn't it. I told this story on video, something I've actually never told in my personal life to anyone, but I'm going to mention it the second time here. I won't go into the detail. But during and after the Philippines for about 2 years, I had this reoccurring nightmare. And I would wake up in cold sweats, and I would just jar myself out of sleep. But if I tell you, you'll say, how is that a nightmare? It's not good, but how is it a nightmare? There's this, where this was at Subic Bay, because on this particular thing, I was in the Marine Corps. And there's this bridge, and the bridge crosses this nasty river that's open sewage at the time. As a matter of fact, its nickname was Shit River. And so you got this bridge, and you walk across the bridge, and you have all these little kids that are begging for pesos, Philippine pesos. They're pretty big, heavy coins. The wage at that time was 7 pesos to the dollar, and the typical wage there was about a peso for the day. But you would have kids begging for pesos or centavos or whatever, begging for coins. And my nightmare, and they would jump off the bridge, they would dive into the poop water after pesos. So you'd have people, foreigners, throwing these pesos into the river, which, I mean, you couldn't see. It looked like mud, but it was poop. They would dive in and swim around till they found the peso and then come back out. And people were doing that for their own entertainment. I mean, the whole situation was pretty gross. And I'm not a delicate person, but I don't know, you got to be pretty jaded not to think that's gross. But my nightmare was, in my dream, I'd be walking across this bridge, and a kid would come up for some coins, and I would hand him a coin. And then 3 or 4 more would come up, and I'd hand out coins. Next thing I know, I'd be mobbed. I'd be surrounded by hundreds of these kids. Remember, it's a dream. Hundreds of these kids. And next thing I knew, I had this canvas bag full of coins, and I'm throwing all these coins out, and I'm throwing them, and I'm throwing them until I had no more coins left. I just had an empty bag. And that would be the point that I would wake up in a cold sweat. I mean, wet sweat. and be wide awake. It's, you know, it can have a real effect on you. Desperation is a bad thing. And I mentioned this the other day, that if you're poor and you live in the country like I did, it's a blessing, because what it taught for me was independence. But I had the opportunity to go out and hunt for animals. I had the opportunity to forage for things that were edible. Sometimes they weren't so edible and I'd be a little sick, but you know, at least it was there to do that. I didn't have heat, but I could go out and gather up some wood. You know, 8, 9 years old, you can't cut with a dull hatchet, although I tried. So it was really kind of a fortunate thing. But if you live in the city, you don't really have those benefits. And so, you know, if you're in the city living in that kind of poverty, then crime is one of the main outlets for that. So, you know, so when I'm told that I can't understand, with the background that I have for myself personally and things that I've seen, and I could go on and on with stories, but it's really annoying. But it's really annoying if you're a Colombian And people are making assumptions like I listed earlier about you. You know, it's like, oh, you'll do anything for $1, so therefore I can, you know, dangle it in front of you, or you should be oh so grateful, or, you know, it basically bad behavior and they should give it a pass. It can be really annoying. Another thing that I see as a stereotype for people, and again, I'm stereotyping them, but I see it relatively often. It's not uncommon for me to meet somebody from Bogota that has this mindset, that if you're from the USA, that you lived a privileged life, and that what you find as a hardship would be a fortunate life for somebody in Colombia. Therefore, you're insulated from it. You don't get it. You can't understand it. They have this idea that life is easy in the US. Well, for a lot of people, it is. For a lot of people, it's not. I don't know if you're from the US, if you've ever been to places in West Virginia, where to this day, they don't have running water or electric. And even if there is electric near them, maybe they can't afford it. There's no access to health care. The Kennedys went to Virginia when they were running for their elections, and it began with John Kennedy. And one of the reasons he came up with ideas like the Peace Corps and things like that was the shock that he had in West Virginia about the way people lived. And here in the USA, how can they live like that? Well, Peace Corps was for outside the country primarily, but he tried to put programs in, Head Start. There were other things back in those days, you know, trying to address it. Well, those things still exist today. Now, they've become more isolated, thankfully, but you also have different issues. You've got, you know, people that will work themselves to death. You know, here there's a mandatory, 15-day a year vacation. Well, in the US, you're lucky if you get a week. And if you're at a place for a long time, you might, I mean, maybe after a whole bunch of years, you might get up to 4 weeks. Well, now they're talking about here changing the 15 days to 30 days. But that's, you go to work and next year you get a month vacation. You know, so do we say, well, their life is so easy because that's what they get? No, you can't pigeonhole like that. So these stereotypes can be useful, but the danger comes in when you put everybody in that boat. Now, here in Armenia, one of the things that I like about Armenia is they don't look at me as these things. They don't look at, oh, you had a privileged life, or, you know, you don't get it. You can't understand, and you don't get that kind of thing here. I have friends here that when I do videos and I talk about topics, I contact people that I know that are Colombian, and I ask them, what do you think about XYZ? And I'll get different things. It's like not everybody, but usually it'll go in a similar direction. And I'll weigh that with what I think and what research I found. And then when I talk to you guys, it's an accumulation of all that information. You say, well, why can't you do it exact? Well, because in very, very many topics, there's some variation to it. You know, so I try to express that. I take great pains to try to give you as accurate information as I can because of these kind of things. And I certainly don't want to be a portrayer of bad information. Now, sometimes I'll put out something, somebody might not like what I'm saying, but it doesn't mean it's not real. So I was reminded of all this when she came and we were talking some politics, which you're not supposed to do. We're talking some politics, and everything she was telling me was true, but everything she was telling me I'd heard dozens of times before by people of a certain age or younger here in Manizales. It's a theme around Colombia, and it's a theme with younger people. And it's because they're being taught that, they're saying that to each other, and they don't have a memory of when things were different. And so there's a lot that's taken in. Well, like most politics, they'll take it in, everything is gospel, and that's fine. But then they don't look at what might be the other side of the story. You know, it's like there's always two sides to every story. Well, if you think this is like that, is it automatically assumed that this is evil incarnate? You know, or is there more to it? And if you truly want to know about a country or your own country, and this applies to people in the US, then understanding the scope of what's going on is pretty important. You've got things going on in the US, and I think there are some things that are absolutely evil, but the misunderstanding, I think, that so many have there is if you're a Democrat, that you're part of this. And it's no, when you have extreme things happening, you're usually talking about 5% of a population. But you also have a situation here in Colombia, it's the same, where you have news that says one thing. And so if those people are watching only that, it's all they know. And you might come up with something they've never heard before, and they'll automatically assume that you're some crackpot conspiracy theory, and they go la 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 la. And the interesting thing here is I don't watch the news here for the same reason I don't watch that there. Although I do get clips once in a while, and I won't say I don't look at clips. I look at the clips, but that's not where I get my information from. But I do find it interesting. I get on my YouTube feed, I've got the recommended, it's the top line of videos, and my next line is always news channels from Colombia. So it'll lay out 6 or 7 news. And you have to laugh because you look at them and you got, we'll say 6 news operations. They're all different. And every day, their headlines are exactly the same. Every day, day after day, it'll be a new headline, but it'll be the same thing. They're all telling the very same story the same way every day. It's lunacy. But if that's where you're getting your news, that's all you know, and therefore it's your truth. Well, you know, I hate that phrase, your truth, because there's truth, and your wishes doesn't mean it's true. And so all of these things kind of in my mind came to a head. I completely got where she was coming from, and she was laying these things out, and based on everything that I knew and everything that I saw when I was here before, what she said was true. But what she didn't have in her arsenal is context for those things. And when I was talking to her, she would get really angry if I would begin to talk about maybe color in the gaps in that information. She would get really angry. And it's exactly the same with what's going on in the United States as polarization. And I don't know the answer to get people to set down that mindset aside. Don't give up what you know, but see if there's more to what you know. I won't go into it here because, you know, I'm not here to trigger people, but she definitely did not have in her arsenal certain information that would have tempered her views. Doesn't mean her view would have changed, but it might have tempered her view, and she might have more understanding. And I think it's important when you have a place like Colombia that currently is teetering on the edge of a couple ways this country can go. I feel pretty secure. I'm not running for the exits, But you have a situation where people older, like if you're talking great grandparents or grandparents, or even in some cases parents, they have more direct knowledge of what they live through. And they tend to be more conservative. And then if you take some parents, but then they're adult children and younger, they have more of a sanitized version of that. And they're definitely more polarized, and they're definitely less accepting. And just like when I was in high school, I left home at 15. But I remember coming home, I think maybe the year I left, I think I was around 15. And I had learned in school from what turned out, I had a social studies teacher who was a socialist, but I didn't know what that meant back in that time. And this was during the Cold War and Vietnam and all of that. And this teacher was saying, well, the Soviet Union, they're just very misunderstood, and they're good people, and they've never done anything bad. And she was telling me all this stuff, and she's saying, so I go home, and my mother was extremely prejudiced. She was born in France. She was extremely prejudiced against Japanese. And to her, everybody in Asia was Japanese. Against Germans and against Russians. She hated communism with a passion. That was her thing with the Russians. Germany, because she was from France. She also hated Chinese. Her father was a French diplomat to China, and while he was there, he was stabbed in the back and killed. And so you throw that in with Pearl Harbor, and all Asian people will stab you in the back. And she had this firm belief. And I came home, and I was throwing out what I just learned about the Soviet Union. And in retrospect, later, I learned how far off I was. Things I learned about Che Guevara. Later, when I actually learned from some real sources and not just from propaganda, I saw the rest of that story. But at the time, and I'm 15 years old, I got this from school. She just doesn't know. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I know because I'm getting educated, and I got all the answers. And you have that kind of arrogance for a while. And stereotyping kind of plays into that. Well, she was furious that I had these viewpoints that she knew were wrong, or at the very least, half information. But I saw it as fulsome. I saw it as that's the way it is. And those are the kind of things that lead to difficult arguments or countries being split in two. And the thing with Colombia that you should understand, it's through its history that kind of exploded after World War II. This country has been divided in two camps, conservative and liberal, we'll call it. It's more than that, but we'll call it that. And it'll settle down for a period of time, and then it'll rear its ugly head. And then you throw in there in the 80s, the drug trade and all of that, and you get this conglomerate. Those were probably the worst times, because with the drug trade and the money and the police enforcement, you then had groups that would flourish. You would have right-wing groups that, under the guise of trying to defeat the criminals, would go out and commit crimes themselves, assassinations. You would have left-wing groups that would call themselves for the people, like the FARC, socialists, but they would go in a village and they would do some good here or there to build up their reputation. But where it wasn't really seen, they would actually take control of entire villages and use the people for slave labor in their own drug trade. So you had all this horrific stuff going on, and it was all political on the surface of it to to position it, and then you'd have people that would follow or support. So you got a right-wing group that's basically a death squad, and they're not just out being a death squad for criminals that are doing harm to the society, but maybe they're also throwing in occasionally somebody they just don't like. You know, somebody wouldn't mow his lawn soon enough. And so you got these death squad, and you've got people lined up behind them that because they were right wing, they would support them and not want to listen about the atrocities that maybe they committed along the way. Even if you looked at their superficial thing where they were doing some good. So this country has had a real tough time. And then at one point they just said no more. And they went out and they started fighting against this. And they beat back the FARC and they beat back the ELN, and some groups disbanded. The FARC was supposed to disband, but you know, they've reconstituted themselves. But they're all off in the fringes. They're not in the populations. But that cleared the way for some better times, where instead of having the majority of your population in poverty, Colombia got down to, pre-COVID, got down to about 9% of abject poverty. So, you know, things were definitely improving. The economy was improving. Well, now it's kind of tough because the politics have gone in a different direction, but it's off the back of COVID and inflation that is being driven mostly by the United States. And so how do you separate one from the other? And do you blame the politician in Colombia for things that maybe they're not in his control? And if people aren't willing to listen, how do you ever find solutions? So I know I'm going on and on about this, but it's been my pet peeve because it begins with people that fly into Medellin and they assume that all these poor people, you know, I need to tip them and things like that. I won't go into tipping again. I've talked about it so many times. And I'm not saying, you know, don't tip, but if you're doing something, you should at least understand it. You know, the waitresses are making the same as everybody else in that place. It's not the USA. And if you go into places in Europe, they don't tip either. So in Medellin is no longer Colombia in my view, or at least parts of Medellin. It's something other. It's very commercialized. It's corrupted a lot of the culture of the Colombians that live there. And not everybody, of course, not every barrio, but you can't help but travel throughout Colombia and then go to Medellin and see the striking difference. In Bogota, there's a lot of similarity there. And then you come to Manizales or Popayan or Bucaramanga, or you go to other places where you don't have all these foreigners and you see a different Colombia. Or you just go out and see pueblos. You see yet another kind of Colombia. So as expats, as gringos, as visitors, please try to keep this stuff in mind. It's one thing to understand what the stereotype is. It's another thing to act like it's real. Because if you're going to meet 10 people today, that stereotype might be real with 2 of them. But what about everybody else? There's a whole spectrum of things that could be. And instead of putting them in a box, maybe learn from them. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Hopefully that did some good other than bore you to death. Let me go see if there's any chat here. Dog was found, I saw this morning. Gil, good morning from Northern California. Owen, Google confirms dog still missing. Good morning from Cerritos. How you doing, John? Buenos dias. NB890. What else we got here? Whoop, that's not it. Black James Bond, thank you for the contribution. I appreciate it. I was going on and didn't even see it. All right. My voice is still operating, so let's do this. Time to start asking your questions. Remember, 4 question marks first, then ask the question. Hello, Lauren. I saw many beggars in Pereira, more than I see in Ecuador. Do you think Ecuador is not such a poor country? No. In Ecuador, and you've lived there for a while, so you know what I'm going to tell you is true if you were ever paying attention. You take a place like Cuenca, where you still live, where you live near it. Or I know you lived there for a period of time. And I lived there for a while. In Cuenca, they hide it. They don't let the beggars out on the street except indigenous. And they actually promote, they pay indigenous to dress up and be sure they're dressed in their outfit and go out on the street and sell their wares or beg or whatever. I learned this from Ecuadorians when I was there. And you also, as you're there, if you pay attention, you notice things like they have actual entire department in the government that's sole purpose is to sanitize information so that it doesn't affect tourism. So when you have things like murders, there's a good chance you won't hear about it because it'll be sanitized. This tourism department of Ecuador is very active and it's been very effective. And it gives this idea that it's like the safest place on the planet and all of that. Where all about you, there's all kinds of problems going on. I'm not saying that they're more unsafe than anywhere else. I'm just saying that the information you get about it is skewed. In Colombia, they don't have that kind of bureau. And when a murder happens, people are more than happy to spread it around, talk about it. Shows up on the newspaper that I read, the Condillo paper online. Whenever there's a murder, it's headline. It's front page. And there's murders here. The reason I don't talk about the murders that much is because almost entirely, with very few exceptions, and those exceptions only come up every year or so, the murders that will occur here occur among criminals in barrios you'll never see. It's all self-inflicted. It's what, think, well, it's not Chicago anymore, but at one time it was like Chicago. Or if you go to South Central LA, there'll be a lot of crime there, but the rest of LA, it's nowhere near like that. Well, here they don't chase beggars off the street. They have this attitude that live and let live. If they're in that kind of situation, then leave them alone. Don't bother them. The cops, unless they're doing something to really annoy people, I mean, not just ask for money or whatever, the cops won't bother them. They're having enough hard time. So it's not the case in Ecuador. So it's not that there's more here than Ecuador. It's that here they just don't bother. In the U.S., you can have beggars. You'll see them on 4-lane roads, mostly under bridges, pretending that they're veterans and holding up cardboard signs and will work for food and all that when they're really after money. You got them in the U.S., but they actually, in a lot of places, they have to be permitted to be on those street corners. They control where they are. And if they're not where they're supposed to be with permission, they can get arrested. That's the vagrancy laws. So here, they just don't do that. So it's one of the reasons you get that stereotype about the extent of poverty. Yes, there's absolutely poverty here. There's horrific poverty. There's a certain amount of starvation that occurs in Colombia. So I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is if you want to see it, it'll be in your face. if you want to go to some of the outlying places, if you really want to see the extent of poverty in Colombia, go out on the coast. I would say from Buenaventura and north. There you're going to see horrific poverty. So poverty exists, but it's not hidden. Where in Ecuador it's hidden, in the United States it's hidden to a certain extent. Pre-COVID, I was talking about numbers, and I did quite a deep dive on poverty, the extent of poverty. What are the layers of poverty? Poverty as in you're not eating versus poverty where you're just struggling to get your rent paid. There's a big difference there. One, you're on death's doorstep, and the other, you're not at threat of dying, but you might be homeless, you know, so you got that range. And at that time, the pre-COVID, the overall poverty in Colombia wasn't very much higher. It was only like 5% higher than it was in the United States. The danger zone poverty was several percent higher than the US. But depending on year to year, there were actually some years where the US was higher. So it does exist, but even if you're in the US, you may not realize that. I used to say a long time ago, before I actually tried to learn before I opened my mouth, that there's no such thing as poverty in the United States. I used to say that because I traveled and I saw real poverty. People can and do die from real poverty. Colombia, I point this out all the time. If you talk to anybody here and ask about their grandparents or great-grandparents, they'll all confirm, and I'll actually say this. Let me guess, your grandparents were like 4 foot something. Yeah, how did you know? Because the nutrition years ago in Colombia was borderline starvation. And a lot of things took place in Colombia, like Milo and a number of other things to build nutrition in. Now, the average Colombian is about the same height as the average US person. It is not unusual to run into females that are 5'7", 5'8". I run into guys that are born and raised and their family goes back generations. They could be blonde haired, blue eyed, 6'3". But their parents weren't, or their grandparents weren't, or their great grandparents weren't. So these things have a great effect. And it's kind of a fool's trap to fall into. There's more poverty here than there is here. Poverty is poverty. And the best thing to do is, if you're young and you can have impact, is maybe make that something that you work towards, you know, do something to help. Even in the US, once I got to a point where instead of assuming I was learning things, I used to be an anonymous I've never really talked about this. It's kind of embarrassing, but I used to be an anonymous donor for the Salvation Army. And I put together various programs for fundraising and things like that. Not for the clothes and that, but Salvation Army does things like they'll have homes for abused women, for example, where they can go there and live under protection for a period of time, you know, have a safe, warm bed, get meals. Salvation Army does an awful lot of good. And, you know, so there's things like that that people can be involved in, and you don't have to go broadcast or tell people about it. You know, I'm long past that age. I'm staring down the barrel of imminent death at this point. But yeah, poverty's a thing. And the thing here in Colombia is it's in your face. It's not hidden. Look around Plaza Bolivar and Pereira, plenty of poverty. Yep. America's last great president, JFK. I wouldn't say that, but he certainly would. He wouldn't be acceptable today because he was as conservative as what people say are conservatives today. Love my hat. I do too. I love this hat. I don't wear hats, but I like this hat. This is a really good hat. It was not cheap. It's handmade. It's made out of a material that's the Colombian version of Toquilla, which they use in Ecuador for the Panama hats, where it feels fabric soft. It's not quite that soft, but the upside, it's very soft, but the upside is it keeps its shape. Where my Ecuadorian Panama hat, I struggled with the shape. I've had this hat now for videos for 3-4 years, and it's got the same shape as when I bought it. So that's pretty cool. At the stores, they ask if you want to pay in pesos or dollars, which is better. Never pay in dollars. You're going to get screwed. They would like you to do that. So you don't really get that here, although I've heard that some of the big chains might ask, but I've never been asked here. But in Medellin, Bogota, it was pretty common. I've been asked in places like that. I also, give me a chance to clarify something. 5 years ago or so, I did a video, maybe further back, before I actually was living here, but I was coming constantly. I mentioned that Colombia is a cash economy, pretty much like Ecuador was. And at the time, credit cards were really not much of a thing, and debit cards weren't much of a thing. Everything was cash. Well, from that time till now, it's changed. Like a lot of things changed. It's changed a lot. And you can live now really without hardly any cash in your pocket if you have your debit card or credit card. Pretty much what used to be only a few big chains, now it's almost everywhere you go, except maybe a small local tienda or a small local restaurant that's only doing empanadas or something like that. But even that is changing. I've seen it in some smaller places that shock me that they're doing credit cards. Just this year, I'll go out and I'll use my debit card, not my US debit card, my debit card here. I'll use my debit card and carry even less cash. You know, so you need it for taxis, so whatever you think it's going to be, double that. Maybe throw in another 50 or something, and you know, so maybe you keep 100,000 pesos or less on your person, but you can carry your card. They're actually going to. There are a number of places now where you can actually use your phone for payment. Also, in the U.S., it's pretty common. Here, it was non-existent until just recently. And right now, it's mostly in the big chains. But if it follows suit, then next year or the year after, you'll see it even in some of the local restaurants. Okay. Here we go. I will be in Armenia July 4th through the 18th. You have said that you have connections to local to show people around. Any English-speaking guides? Yeah. Currently, I know maybe 3 people. I will say that it's not really important if you have a guide that speaks English or not. And what the guides are doing, it's not so much like a tour bus kind of thing, although there can be some of that. It's mostly, you get here, you don't really know your way around. It's like if you're new to a place, you know, what are the bus lines? How do I catch a bus? What are the taxis like? Even from city to city, they can have variations. You know, so you want to go out and enjoy, but you can find yourself trying to navigate a lot of basic things, making mistakes, getting on the wrong bus, ate up your day, you lost a day, maybe you only had 2 weeks to be here. You know, it can really kind of throw a wrench in the works. Whereas if you have somebody that can walk you through, make sure you get to the place that you're trying to go to, learn some things along the way without losing any time. You know, how do I find apartments? Where's the best shopping malls? Where can I go I want to go to Salento. Can somebody take me to Salento? Having somebody speak English can be nice, but honestly, it's really not necessary. But I've got both. I don't have. It's not like they work for me. I don't keep track of them every single day. I don't always know, you know, their availability. If I know ahead of time, I'll ask, and if I think they're going to be available, then I put you two together, and you can communicate and schedule and plan. I don't want any part of it. I'm not getting any kickbacks on or anything like that. It's just that, you know, if people can use the extra money and I can send something their way, I'm happy to do it, because the people that do that are pretty much my friends, and so why wouldn't I? Exactly what I'm looking for. Yeah. And I have people say, well, they want to hire me to do that, but I don't really do that. You know, it's, I charge you too much for that. You know, I do something more in depth. So, and if I got one case now where I feel like he didn't get good value, so I'm adding some things to what we originally talked to, because I want to make sure he's getting the value. But when it comes to the guides, I mean, you buy their lunch. If there maybe there's some transportation, like if you're going to Salento, for example, of course you're going to pay for her transportation. She shouldn't have to pay out of pocket, and you know, maybe give her $100,000 for the day or something along those lines, and it works out real good. Everybody's got Google these days. If they're my friends and they're doing this, my Spanish is terrible, but I manage to communicate with them. I actually will speak Spanish to them, but even then, occasionally we've got to pull out the Google every once in a while over some concept, or where I'll get stuck and what is that? What is the word I'm trying to think of? I can't think of it. So I'll quick Google. Oh, yeah. Or that's a new word. All right. Do you have any other questions? My voice held up for over an hour. How awesome is that? I'll give it a minute and then we'll wrap up for today. Had no spam, so that's pretty awesome. I was kind of shocked because I'm such a small potatoes. You can actually, I don't know if I should say this, but you can actually hire an outfit on the internet to do that to a channel, and it's only a few dollars. So I was thinking, maybe I pissed somebody off. I don't know. Are you something alone? How can you get a hold of me? Best way to get a hold of me is send me an email. There's my email. Send me an email, and then I'll get your WhatsApp number, whatever. We'll figure out a communication. Then I'll say, hold on, let me check, and I'll check with whoever, and then I'll just give you both. I'll give her your contact, and I'll give you her contact. Then you guys take it from there. I thought it might be YouTube inside job to get rid of channels they don't like. You know, when I saw the comments were off and I saw the way that YouTube was handling it, that thought had occurred to me. Because if they know this is going on, and they know it basically shuts you down as far as chats go, and a lot of people do what I do. You know, it's about communication. if they know about it, other channels, it doesn't happen because they have mechanisms to not allow it to happen. But YouTube is, you have to wonder, it's like, why are they letting this happen? But they'll direct you to their tools. Put it in the slow chat, make everybody subscribe. I think that's unreasonable. I don't want to subscribe to every channel I've ever seen. I know I'm supposed to say like, comment, subscribe, but it doesn't help my algorithm. It doesn't change anything in my life. So if you don't want to, don't. I mean, of course, I appreciate seeing the likes. Like, I see them every week. I look at it. I get this little thing of satisfaction. Well, they don't hate me. I'll go another week. So it's nice to see it, but it's not going to contribute to my life in any other way. Other channels, however, your subscription and your likes are the formula for success for other channels that aren't in my situation. So keep that in mind. If you never subscribe to your favorite few channels, you might want to help boost them. All right. No more questions. We've run the gamut. Still got quite a few viewers surprised, but it will fall off here in a minute. I'll give you one last look. Blue sky, sunshine. It's absolutely stunning. Oh my God, it's beautiful. And I will see you next week. Ciao.